My ship was a small aircraft carrier. As we used to tell people, we had 480 feet of flight deck, whether you needed it or not. And so the fighter planes could fly off. The torpedo bombers had to be attached to the catapults and catapulted off to get up enough speed so they could fly. And so my job, here I'd spent a year learning how to be an aviation machinist mate. And so what did they do? They put me on the deck crew. I was operated an arresting gear station, and on landing, when the planes were taking off, I hooked them up to the catapult, the torpedo bombers. I hooked them up to there. But here the thing was sitting on the deck, at the end of the catapult, with the engine going and the propeller, and I had to get this wire rope bridle and walk around, get inside behind the propeller, hook the thing onto the landing gear, walk out around the propeller outside, and come in on the other side and hook the other end of the bridle to the landing gear. Then I signaled to the person operating in the catwalk, and I said, tighten it up. And then, so they'd tighten it up till it was tightened up, and I'd get out of the way and tell them okay, and then the launch officer would tell the pilot to rev up his engine, and then he'd signal forward, and they'd push the button on the catapult will signal the people down in the catapult room to fire, so they'd push the button, and off they went.
Do you remember the name of your ship?
Yes, it was called USS Bogue, B-O-G-U-E, named after Bogue Island in the Northeast. It was number was CVE 9. CVE stands for carrier. C carrier, V heavier than air, like instead of being a balloon type lighter than air, it was CVE escort. We were an escort carrier, so we were CVE, carrier, heavier than air, escort, number 9. Yeah, I remember all of that. Can you believe it? I was aboard that ship for about 2 years, and then decided I was dreaming that the ship had turned turtle upside down, and I was trapped inside and couldn't get out. I dreamed that for 2 or 3 nights in a row. I said, it's time for me to get off this ship. So I went to the officer in charge of our unit, and I said, could I be transferred to the beach? And he said, sure. So when we got back to Norfolk, I was transferred over to the Norfolk Air Navy Air Station in Norfolk, where I spent the last few months of my hitch. What we did was we sailed through the Atlantic looking for submarines and sinking them. They had, actually, I think by the time I got out, they'd had about 20 kills, 20 German submarines that had sunk, as well as 2 Japanese submarines. 2 Japanese submarines we sank, yes. These were submarines that were built by the Japanese in somewhere over in their islands. But we knew, the U.S. intelligence knew when they laid down the keel, when they launched them, when they were loaded, and when they set sail. And they sailed down from Japan, down around the tip of Africa, up into the Atlantic. And when they got in the right area, they told us, go get them. And we did. We sank them both. And we had when I left the ship, we had about 20 German submarines. We had sunk in 2 Japanese submarines.
Can you remember any of the events that occurred during combat?
We weren't really in combat where anybody was shooting at us, except the rumor went through the ship that, hey, there was a torpedo crossed our bow last night. I don't know whether it really did or not, or if somebody made up the story. But the closest I came to actual combat was standing on the flight deck of the aircraft carrier, watching over on the horizon our planes bombing a Japanese submarine, and the submarine surfaced, and everybody abandoned ship, sank the submarine, and that was it. We picked up the survivors, or that is, our destroyer escorts picked up the survivors. A few days later, they transferred them over to us, and we kept them down in the forward hold. That's where I don't know how many there were, 20 or 30 of them, I guess. And they were down there, and the story went around the ship, probably true, that the guard that they had sitting on the ladder, stairways in the Navy are called ladders. He was sitting on the stairway with his submachine gun on his lap one night, and he was tired, and he went to sleep. The next thing he knew, one of the prisoners was shaking and saying, "Hey, you better stay awake or you're going to get into trouble." They could have taken the ship, taken his submarine, his weapon away from him and taken over the ship. But I don't think at that point they wanted to. They'd had enough, and they were ready to go back with us to the States and spend the rest of the war in a prisoner of war camp. That was a lot better than being on a submarine, especially those German submarines. They had one that was captured by another aircraft carrier and taken back to land, and the intelligence people looked over and did all they wanted with them, and then they donated it to the Museum of Science and Industry in Chicago. And one time while I was in Chicago, I went on tour, went through it. This was after the war, of course, but I went through the thing, and in order to go from the front of the submarine, and well, you don't have front and back in the Navy, it's fore and aft, but going from fore to aft or from aft to fore, you had to turn sideways and edge past the diesel engines if you were on the surface, and walk through the captain's cabin, and to get from front of the ship to the back, or back to front. We actually had to go through the captain's cabin. So being on a German submarine wasn't very much fun. I think they had bunks for 1/3 of the crew, and so you were in the bunk for 8 hours, then you had to get out and somebody else spent 8 hours in that same bunk while you did your work, and then 16 hours later, it was back to your turn to go sleep for 8 hours in the bunk. They were really tight on space in those German submarines. I'm sure glad I didn't have to serve on one of those.